guess we can go ahead. Maybe you could just start by recalling your memories of your dad going over.
Well, that was my earliest remembrances of anything about Kerr Dam, and I probably didn't figure out what it was until later, that he'd get up real early in the morning to catch a ride to go to work up at Kerr Dam. But I was only about 8 or 9 years old at the time and didn't understand the significance of it.
Okay. Anything else you want to add about that?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Well, maybe we can ask how you worked in the tribal government for a long time, and maybe you could just talk about when you first went into tribal government and why, and what made you feel that work would be a good thing for you.
Well, I was scheduled to retire from the Marine Corps in November of 1967, and a couple months earlier, or prior to that, my sister sent me the advertisement where they were advertising for a tribal secretary, and I felt that I was qualified for the job and I needed one. I would be needing one in October or in November, so I applied for it. And when I did finally get my retirement papers on the 1st of November, I drove up for an interview with the tribal council, and subsequently I was hired. I think I went to work either the last part of November or the first week in December of 1967 as the tribal secretary.
What was it about that job that, was there things about that job that you particularly liked? Or?
Well, I didn't know anything about it. It was the job was administrative in nature, and we used to call ourselves transient administrators in the Marine Corps. We'd get transferred every couple of years, and we were well versed in personnel administration and budget management, and that's basically what the job description called for. So like I say, I was needing a job at the time, and I applied for the best one available.
Okay, well maybe you could tell us about what your first interactions with Kerr Dam were in that job.
At the time, in 1967, we had the negotiations going on for the readjustment of annual charges. At the time, we were getting, I believe, $235,000 a year for Kerr Dam, and we were seeking to have the annual charges increased as was provided for under the initial license, that after 10 years after operation, began operation, we could apply for an increased annual charge. And that should have been done in 1967, but it wasn't until finally settled, I believe, until 1972, where the charge was increased from $235,000 up to $950,000. I read all of the documents pertaining to the increased annual charge at the time, and also I became familiar with the taking of power values case where the tribe sued the United States for taking the cheap block of power. The tribes contending that it reduced the amount of money that Montana Power Company was willing to pay the tribes, since they had to furnish the government that cheap block of power. So by the time the first readjustment case was over, I was thoroughly versed on all of the phases of, or all aspects of the Kerr Dam.
One question that came to mind while you were just talking about that is, I was wondering how long had you been away from the reservation?
Yes, I graduated from high school in in June of 1946, and in August I enlisted in the Marine Corps and spent the next 21 years, 3 months and 8 days there. So I was totally unfamiliar with what was going on back here. The only time I came back was 4 or 5 times during the summer on vacation.
Where did you graduate from high school?
Ronan.
When you came back, were there things you did in particular to get reacquainted with what was happening around the reservation?
Well, I immediately read all the minutes of the prior council meetings from 1934, 35 on up to the present, and anything else pertaining to tribal business that would help carry out my job duties. And of course, the employees at the time and the councilmen at the time were very helpful too. And we had an excellent staff of attorneys at the time. Not a staff attorneys, the general counsel kept me informed.
Well, I guess towards the late 70s, the council must have begun to anticipate the ending of the license for the dam. What were the first plans or whatever that the council took?
Well, that wasn't the next thing that happened. The next thing that happened, after the first increase in the annual rental, was they applied for the second 10-year annual rental as provided for in the license. And that drug on until, I believe, 1978. The council finally accepted a settlement, negotiated settlement of raising it from $950,000 up to $2.6 million a year. Both of those settlements, by the way, were negotiated settlements that we never did get to a full hearing before the Federal Power Commission, or what is now the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They were always arrived at by negotiation before the thing went to final trial.
Why is that?
Well, as in any negotiation, you work out the best deal you can, keeping your principals informed of what the settlement offers are, and you have to weigh that against the chances of going to court. Anytime you go to court, you have to stand a chance of losing. And if you can reach a satisfactory agreement without going to litigation, it's to your advantage.
How did the council come to view $2.6 million as an acceptable amount?
Well, we had retained consultants and our attorneys, and they would conduct the negotiation. In those days, the attorney and the consultants we hired would, with perhaps a couple councilmen sitting in, would reach an agreement, and then they'd bring that agreement back to the full council. And knowing what the facts and figures were, the attorneys and consultants would advise the council on whether they thought that that was as much as could be obtained from Montana Power, or as much as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission would approve. And it was just a judgment call on the part of the council whether to accept or tell them to go back to the negotiating table.
Was the business around Kerr Dam pretty much carried on at the level of the executive government? I mean, was there any involvement from the tribal membership, or were they aware of the proceedings?
They were briefed periodically during the quarterly meetings on the status of the negotiations on Kerr Dam and any other litigation that the tribes were involved in. It wasn't like it is now, it's kept in secret. It was done in the open. Well, the attorneys and staff would do the negotiation, bring the thing back to the council, then the council would, and the attorneys, and occasionally the consultants would meet with the people at a quarterly meeting and explain where things stood.
It sounds like, though, that practically a fairly small percentage of tribal membership was really aware of that kind of thing that might be going on.
To the extent that you never disclose everything that you're negotiating to the general public, probably those who read the Charcusta were a little bit more apprised of what was going on. There was some of it put in there, but generally it was put out at the quarterly meetings. And the councilmen probably talked to their districts at the time. I don't know, but everyone seemed to be getting the word.
Okay. Well, I guess now we can begin to talk about anticipating the license coming up towards the end of the license period.
Well, I think it always was the goal of the council to take over the dam in 1980 when the license expired. It was their understanding that it would be pretty much automatic. It came as a surprise and a shock to them, and I know it did me, that it was going to be so difficult to wrest the dam away from Montana Power. But like I said, it was my understanding, I'm certain it was the understanding of most councilmen and most tribal members, that in 1980 the dam reverted to the tribes, period. But obviously we now know that that's not true.
What led the tribes to believe that it would revert?
Well, the license was for 50 years, and I believe there was language in the original license that stated that it would revert to the tribes after the term of the original license.
Well, I'm a bit unclear. If there was language in the original license saying that, how did the...
Well, I may be wrong on that, saying it flat out, but I understood that the dam was built on tribal property, and it was built with a 50-year license. The license was to expire in 1980, and historically it was believed by me and most other people that in 1980 the dam would revert to the tribe.
So the aim of the council at that time was this, with the assumption they would be getting the dam back, and they were not. I know that at a later time there was some difference of opinion as to whether the tribe should go ahead and try to get operation of the dam, or just try to get an increased rental fee.
Up until 1983, late 83, maybe early 1984, we were operating under the assumption that we were going to get it back. In fact, the chairman, our attorneys, and several of our consultants made trips to Southern California, to the Sacramento area, to the Seattle-Tacoma area, talking with utilities, trying to find a buyer who would purchase the output of Kerr Dam from the tribes. And we understood at the time, at least it was my understanding, that it was necessary to find a willing buyer to increase our chances of getting the license in our name when the Federal Energy Commission made their decision. If we didn't have a sale of the power, our chances would be less of getting the license in our name. But we spent a couple of years making these trips down there to Southern California around trying to find a willing buyer. And we had some of them interested. We just never got to the point of signing a contract because we didn't progress that far down the road of getting the dam turned back to us.
Yeah, I heard somewhere that it was kind of a catch-22. That it was difficult to get markets without having the license, and it was difficult to get the license without having the markets.
Well, then too, we were dealing with the wrong people. Montana Power Company is an investor-owned utility, and we were talking to investor-owned utilities for the most part about the sale of power. And a lot of the co-ops that we were talking to rely on other investor-owned utilities. So nobody wanted to cross Montana Power up by saying, sure, we'll buy your power. They had us in the corner.
Was there anywhere else you could have gone to try to market power, or did they pretty much have it locked up?
Well, the only access to the large market would have been a large city like Los Angeles, Sacramento, SeaTac area. That's the only ones we tried. I don't think there's a way to get power anywhere to the east.
Well, maybe you could describe how the council's position or the ideas about the dam changed as it became clear that Montana Power wasn't going to go ahead.
Well, it was a kind of a fluctuating thing. Most of the council felt, or I'm not going to say most of them, a lot of the council felt that their obligation was to get the best deal for the tribes, the most monetary return for the tribes, whether it was through relicensing the dam to Montana Power or some other entity, or getting the license in their own name. The bottom line was, how much can we make off of it? And we negotiated for a long time with that in mind. And then I don't know how it was brought up that maybe if we take less money, we can get the dam back in our full ownership of the dam in 25 or 30 years, or there was all sorts of time frames talked about, from 10 to 50 years. But it was in September, I believe, of 1984 where the council became directly involved in the negotiations, and they cut the deal with Montana Power where they'd accept $9 million and give Montana Power the first 30 years of a 50-year license. And eventually the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission signed off on that, and that's what we're working under today.
Did you find yourself in agreement with that strategy?
Well, I'll probably get shot for saying this, but I think that the cardinal rule of negotiation is that you never get the principals involved in the immediate negotiations. You always work through negotiators. They work out the details of a proposal and bring it back to the principals for approval. Well, the council put it on themselves to do the direct negotiation, and I think that they might have panicked a little bit and accepted somewhat less than they could have if they'd have worked through detached negotiators who were out to get the best deal they could.
So in other words, they just lacked expertise?
They lacked the expertise and the willpower, I think, to, Montana Power Company can negotiate pretty aggressively. And they'd call their head man in, Mr. Schmeckel, once in a while, and he'd say a few words and make haste back to Butte where he couldn't be found. And there the council sitting ready to make a decision, talking to lawyers and consultants and vice presidents of Montana Power. So it was not a good situation to find themselves in, facing they were worried about Montana Power walking out, and we'd have to go direct to FERC and settle it in a litigious situation. But they cut what they thought was the best deal and accepted it. Now, all during the negotiations, the consultants that we had and attorneys were in on the roundtable discussion with the Montana Power Company. The council sat in on those, and finally they just asked all of us to leave the room, and when it reached $9 million and Montana Power to have the first 30 years, they asked all of us to leave the room, and pretty quick they come out and said, we've decided to accept, and that was it. It was a lot of the consultants and expert opinions, including my own, that we could have got a lot more out of Kerr Dam than what we ended up with.
Do you have any estimation of what that might have been?
Well, we were talking the bottom line before the council accepted that agreement. We was talking $15 million was not unreasonable to expect. And I still don't think, I think somewhere around between $12 and $15 million was achievable. We had experts even from the government that said we should be getting anywhere from 28 to 48 million. So knowing that was FERC probably wouldn't approve anything of that magnitude, even though it was justified on paper. It was pretty much the consensus of the council when the negotiations in Missoula started that we'd settle for $15 million, and that was our bottom line.
That's quite a difference from
I think the compelling thing that made them agree to accept that was the surety that in 30 years they're going to get the control of the dam. So they gave up 30 years of the difference between $9 million and what they could have gotten for the assurance that they're going to get the license, or they've got the license, getting the control of the dam.
But you would rather have had the increased yearly rental fee rather than control over the dam?
No, I think we could have had both. It might have taken a little bit longer, but I was after the best return for the tribe that we could possibly get monetarily. I don't care who operates the dam as long as we're getting a fair return for it. In fact, there's a lot of headaches going to be involved with ownership that we don't have now. But that's not to say we can't get a fair return for it.
Why do you think the council did want to get directly involved in negotiations?
Well, you'll have to ask them that.
You don't have any idea?
Yeah, well, I have my own opinions, but off the record, I'll tell you.
Okay. All right. I first came to work for the college in '83, and it was a year after that, basically, when there were some fairly large eruptions within the tribe around this whole relicensing of Kerr Dam. I know that some of it surrounded a petition that E.W. Morgio was circulating, suggesting a settlement for $30 million, whatever it was a one-time payment, and that will be divided up per capita within the tribe. Do you have any memories of that or anything you want to?
I remember that, yes. It created an awkward situation for the tribe. He should have been impeached for it on the spot for negotiating outside of channels without authority, without authorization of the council. That was my feeling about it. But that was a history of his negotiation. When we were negotiating the proposed Northern Tier pipeline, he was screaming, "Let's settle," when we reached $11 million for a right-of-way for 30 years, and we got it up to $28 million. So he was just trying to make himself a few dollars, obviously.
How would he make himself a few dollars off of it?
Well, the implications are quite clear. If Montana Power Company saved a few $1 million by him going in the back door, I'm sure that they would be willing to take care of him. That was the only logical explanation for it. He knew what the figures were.
It seemed that the figure he was talking about was really a paltry sum.
It was, and he knew that.
It did seem that there were a lot of tribal members who were convinced by his arguments at that time, though, and seemed supportive of trying to get that immediate per capita payment.
Well, he's a very persuasive politician, and a lot of people, if you offer them a quick buck, they're going to take it, not looking down the road 15, 20, 30 years. A lot of people on welfare, you offer them $1,000 for sign their tribal rights away, they'll take it. I think there's petitions over in the tribal files that'll prove that. But that doesn't mean it's in the best interest of the tribe.
Do you remember, I remember also that there was a kind of grassroots organizing within the tribe at that time for direct control of the dam. And there was that Kerr Dam vigil up at the dam site and everything. Do you remember anything about that, or did you have any contact with it?
That's where they had that camp out up at the dam. That was a calling of attention to the plight that we were under and the unfairness with the rules under which we had to operate. Here it was our land, our dam, our water, and everything else, but Montana Power had the upper hand. We were just trying to get publicity favorable for the tribe, and I think we did that.
I was wondering if you could more on the kinds of difficulties that were faced by the tribes going into the negotiations? Was there any sense in which just the inherent position of the tribe was a difficult one to negotiate from?
No, I don't think the position was difficult. It was the realities of the case where FERC didn't want to turn over to an Indian tribe a valuable resource such as Kerr Dam, and I don't believe they understood that fully that it was tribal property to begin with. They took it as just another relicensing issue. That was one of the reasons for the Kerr Dam vigil, is to get publicity, to let people know back in Washington know what was going on out here. But that was the biggest thing. When you're dealing with FERC, you're dealing with someone that's totally unfamiliar with an Indian reservation, because I think the only other dam, I think there might be two others, one out at Warm Springs and one up at La Corderay, where they have a small hydroelectric, but not of the magnitude of ours and not of the tangled legal situation that ours was in.
Okay, well, thanks. I guess we have about 4 minutes to go. Let's see. I know that, when was it that you resigned from the executive secretary position?
Well, the first time was in 1977, and then the last time in 1984.
Did the negotiations over the dam have anything to do with your decision to resign?
Well, that was part of it. The way that the council began to operate was totally... I didn't like the way they were beginning to operate, where they would do the main negotiation, and instead of making policy and delegating authority, they were doing everything themselves, which they basically are today. And having been there first 10 years from 67 to 77, and again another, 6 years, I don't need to work that hard or beat my head against the wall that hard.
Is there anything more you want to say about why you didn't think it was a good idea that the tribe council's making that change? They're starting to do things that way?
Well, primarily they can do much more if they set policy and get qualified people to carry out that policy. But it's like I said earlier, that one of the cardinal rules of negotiation, you never get the principals involved in the direct negotiations. They can be much more productive making policy and reviewing that policy than they can sitting there worrying about who's going to get a $200 grocery order or a $25 lease, and like they operate. And they were starting to get away from that, and then they went back to it.
And why they made that change is something you don't want to say.
Well, it's just a matter of personal method of operation of the elected councilman. They thought they could manage it better directly than they could through delegation.
My question now is, now that the settlement's made, there will be this $9 million a year coming in, or is $9 million a year coming in?
I think it's quite a bit more than that now, isn't it? About 9.5 or 9.
Yeah, with the cost of living increase. How do you think the tribes could best make use of that money?
Well, they're doing fairly well. They're spending a lot of money, in my opinion, doing things that the government got them started in that they shouldn't be. Well, they may or may not should be, and that's not the proper terminology. They should or should not pick up these federal programs that were scrapped by the Reagan administration. They're investing money in Two Eagle River School, Head Start, Law and Order, General Assistance, up and down the line in the tribal organization. They're putting tribal money in, which formerly was all federal money. And I think they ought to get away from that and get back to the policy that they wouldn't do that. I think that Kerr Dam recapture fund is a mistake. They're putting up $500,000 away each year to facilitate taking over Kerr Dam or buying Montana Power's interest or severance damages, if any, in 2010, is it, 2015? But they're using today's dollars to pigeonhole away to do something they could borrow that money at and a lot cheaper dollars in 2010 when they need it. They could be using that $500,000 to provide jobs and economic development with the tribe instead of just pigeonholing it away. And other than that, I'm not too familiar with what else is going on because I am not involved anymore.
You said that they shouldn't be picking up with it. Oh, our tape's up. Let's get on our tape. If you want to take a break, a quick break, we can do that.
When I give them advice, it was good and before, I think.
Okay. Okay, I actually don't have very many more questions on this next tape. You've already talked about your ideas about how the tribe should make use of the Kerr Dam land. I'm wondering if you could provide us with a broader sense of what your ideas of how the tribe should move, or the direction the tribe should move in. What's your vision for the future for the tribes, in other words?
Well, I'm not a politician, so I can't answer that. I'm presently involved with Mission Valley Power. It was the tribe's goal and my dream of getting control of the power division of the project and operating it as a utility. And it's my personal opinion that the irrigators should operate the irrigation division after the matter of water rights are settled through negotiation or litigation or whatever way. And I think that's the way they're going right now. I think it'll end up that way.
Well, I'm not asking this in any sense of your official capacities or your job as your former job as executive secretary of the tribes, but just as a tribal member, as a member of the tribal community. What your vision is for the reservation, say 100 years from now. The reason I ask is that in a real sense, the dam for the first time will provide the tribes with the means to move in the direction they choose to move in, rather than having to move in a direction that's determined for them.
Well, that's also debatable. Who's to say that we're not going to have some more efficient, cheaper form of energy in 30 years from now through whether it's cold fusion, magnetohydro, whatever they're doing in Butte there. It'll certainly be a source of power, but will it be as valuable in 2010 as it is now? I don't know. They've got a lot of money right now to do a lot of things with. They manage to increase their budget every time they need to, so I can't see any shortage of money right now to direct the tribe to get people off welfare and get them feeling good about themselves. I think that was a goal when we took over the general assistance from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, is to redesign that program and make it work to put people back to work, make them productive. And we're trying with that EARN program and tribal work experience, but still there's more people on welfare today than there was when we took it over, so I don't think that the economic opportunities are being made available. And that would be what I'd like to see, is everybody that want a job have one. And I don't think we're pointed more of towards a society where all the people are dependent on the council instead of being able to go out and make their own way.
Do you see the traditional cultures here of the Salish and Kootenai, the way people lived as tribes and the way they lived upon the land in this region, as providing, in any sense, a guide for the direction the tribes should
Well, that's pretty much socialistic, and I don't think either one of the tribes would go along with it. I think they're celebrate their traditional culture individually, which is fine, but I don't think you'll ever get them to the point where everything will be share and share alike. They're too capitalistic to do that. A strict tribal community was very socialistic, and I don't think we're headed that direction. At least I don't think the people would stand for that.
Let's see if there's anything else here. Maybe if you could just give us a comment on what your sense is of the impact of the original construction of Kerr Dam on this reservation. I know that you read back through all those minutes when you first came in as executive secretary, and maybe you have some insight about that, about what your sense is of what the impact was, what the historical role has been of Kerr Dam on this reservation.
Well, it's difficult to say what the historical role of it has been, but I believe the tribes would be in rather sad shape today if it weren't for Kerr Dam. It brings them in $9.2 million or $9.6 million today that they wouldn't have if Kerr Dam wasn't there. Now, they couldn't provide all the jobs that they do in tribal government if they didn't have all that money. I think the reservation would have actually broken up if they didn't have Kerr Dam, because it has been a rallying point for the tribe to try to get control of that dam, get more benefit from a tribal natural resource. But we'd be a bunch of real poor people today if it wasn't for Kerr Dam. I think the reservation as a whole would be too. Not only the Indian, but the non-Indian community. That dam alone brings in about $500,000 to Lake County in taxes from Montana Power.
There are those old timers I've talked with who suggest that Kerr Dam was a part of the reason why the tribes are in poor shape now, in another sense, in that it was part of a cultural change here that broke apart the older ways of life.
Well, the older ways of life were such that all of the people today are driving cars and watching television, buying their groceries at the store for the most part. If they want to go back to the good old days, they can still do that. But I think that that isn't the thing that really broke it up. I think opening the reservation to liquor has probably had a bigger influence on breaking up the tribal community than Kerr Dam has.
Okay. Are there, the last few questions are things that just came to mind for me, but if there are other comments you'd like to make about the dam or things in general, this is your chance.
No, I don't think I'd care to comment any further.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time.
Okay.